The white population that lives in Oregon today, in this generation, they really haven't been challenged on the racial issues yet. They will be challenged in the next generation.
In Oregon, there's an image that there's racial diversity and openness.
I think it's pretty progressive, if that's a better adjective.
And I've lived in a number of cities that are more ethnically diverse than Portland is.
I think Portland's gotten more homogenized, or whatever you want to call it, but it's still pretty segregated, I think.
The state which kind of prides itself on being so diverse and progressive.
We would like to think we're more inclusive than we are.
The history of Portland is fascinating, especially in the African American community, because we have seen so many levels that we have moved.
The people who came to Oregon sought to avoid many of the racial problems that the rest of the country was encountering by simply making Oregon a place where only one race was in residence. Well, how do you do that? You put the native population on reservations and you exclude other racial populations from migrating here. And that was the basic framework of racial policy for Oregon life from the 1840s, essentially through to the turn of the 20th century.
During the 1840s, when the Oregon Territory, folks came out because of the land grants.
And all these people have no place to stay. Now look here, mama, what am I to do? Now look here, mama, what am I to do?
The black exclusion policies that were adopted in Oregon in the pioneer generation were very, very effective. Their primary effectiveness came in the ability that they had to discourage blacks from moving to the area. So as a consequence, as Oregon moved into the 20th century, the black population was a very, very small part of the total population in this area.
I works on the ladder, mama, both night and day. I works on the ladder, mama, both night and day. I ain't got nobody, keep the water away.
Now, where did these people live? Portland Housing Authority did not open their arms. These desperate people they thought was going to be temporary, working in the war industry. Henry Kaiser had an idea. He had to have a stable workforce with housing and health care. Henry Kaiser created Vanport. In 1948, just after the flood, there was enough housing in the city of Portland. So the residents from Vanport, the city fathers, moved them out to Giles Lake.
Decisions about important political matters in the 1940s were not made in an open fashion, in a kind of a transparent fashion as we might expect them to be made today. Black communities of the 20th century were artificial creations. Okay? They were creations of the color line. They were completely unnatural in the sense that a large aggregation of people will generally make decisions based on their economic resources as much as anything else in a social sense. But the black community, black individuals didn't have a chance in the middle of the 20th century to make those kind of natural decisions about where they would work or where they would live. That black community had been constructed by decisions in the banking industry, decisions in the political realm that said this particular part of town will be reserved for black residents. And the construction of that community was a very purposeful event in the local life of Portland.
Then the city decided to have a major urban renewal. They asked the folks to move in 1955. They started moving north. North Portland and Northeast Portland.
Just a takeover spirit there.
In terms of the Portland community, probably the most important official decision that has pushed gentrification along at the speed and with the momentum that it has today was the decision several years ago on the state level to institute what were called urban growth boundaries around the Portland cities. That's a system in which They draw a line on a map, and on one side of the line you can develop an urban center, and on the other side you have to retain that as an agricultural reserve, more or less. And when the boundary was drawn around Portland, what that did was automatically increase the value of all the land inside the circle. And of course, the traditional black community was inside that circle.
Folks who lived there, all of a sudden, the property values start going up. As the property values start going up, so did the property taxes.
People have been pushed out of the community. They can't afford to pay the rents anymore here because everything has gone up so high.
Speculation comes when people decide that your neighborhood is a better neighborhood after you've lived through all of the crime and all of the bad things that have happened and begin to make attempts to change things. You know, I think the community here in Portland has done quite a bit to enhance the neighborhood.
And they say they're cleaning up the neighborhood, and there's a few of us that they call a hindrance because we've been here the longest and we don't plan to go anywhere, so we're not really sure what that means.
You know, those are things that happened in Portland that are still happening, but they happened unbeknownst to the people here. You know, and after I brought that up at the meeting, I don't think I was invited to any more meetings, or maybe there was a pause in the meetings, you know.
I'm hoping just by being here that we can save the community. I'd like to see the communities stay and not move.
We're not talking about gentrification, because that's done. That's a done deal. And we always talk about it after it's over.
If I mean old Abby, call me to weep and moan. Come and leave my baby and my happy home.